Hi again then guys, and welcome to the 50th episode of GT Masters on Gran Turismo, and Gran Turismo Sport in particular is the subject of the more recent episodes of this series. We're featuring some of the newer Group 3 cars, some of the real GT3 machines within that category, alongside of course some of the Group 3 fictional or PD original race cars that are in there as well, alongside also some Group 4 cars, which we're going to get to later on also. And this particular episode is featuring a vehicle which is probably one of the most hotly anticipated new machines to be featured on Gran Turismo Sport. It's a car which I'm personally surprised didn't make it into Gran Turismo 6 in some form, because as I've mentioned a number of times on the channel, I consider the C7 Stingray Corvette, along with also the GT concept version which came later on GT6, and of course the test mule which introduced us to that car on GT5 and was then carried over to GT6 as well. That range of C7 Corvettes kind of acted as, I would say, the most significant new car of Gran Turismo 6. Now, I know of course that's a very strong, bold statement to make, and there are plenty of people who would probably disagree and say that there are other more significant additions, but the reason why I consider it to be so significant is because not only is the Corvette a motorsport icon as well as a road-going icon, but also the Corvettes have always been a very strong part of Gran Turismo. As far back as Gran Turismo 1, they've always been among the quickest cars in the game. In the middle region, say from GT3 to GT5 possibly, they weren't as dominant. The C5R was a notable race car around the GT3 era. On GT4, not as much, but it was still a presence. GT5, of course, as I said, we had the test mule of the C7, which brought in that new generation. Way back in the day on GT1 and GT2, we had the more classic Corvettes, which were very powerful. Some of the most powerful cars in the game, in fact, in terms of street vehicles. And on GT6, that was all brought to a head with the C7. And in particular, the normal Stingray version at 51,000 credits is a formidable machine in terms of sheer value for money. It's one of the very few vehicles which offers similar performance to a Nissan GT-R for an even lower price. And I'm not just talking about straight line performance, it's that good around the track as well. Now, this vehicle is of course the logical next step. We have the C7 road car, we have the concept, we have the test mule. What about a racing version? And as I said, I'm surprised that we didn't get this car on GT6, but at the same time, it's kind of not surprising from a marketing point of view that they would hold that back to make people want the new game more. So what is this inaugural, if you will, C7 race car like? In particular, first of all, in Group 3 form, and then, of course, later on, in another episode, the Group 4 form. Well, the performance is strong, as you'd expect a Corvette to be. We're not told what the engine size is, but you can surmise it's probably based, fictionally of course, on the normal C7 Stingray engine. You're looking at 578 horsepower, which is pretty well placed. It's not the most powerful of Group 3 machines, but it's definitely not underpowered either. It's got 572 foot-pounds of torque, which is very good. That is one of the highest of the class, and again, not too surprising for an American engine. But the only potential downside to this Corvette, at least on paper, is the weight. It is a little bit heavier than some of the other machines. Some of the cars which we've already featured weigh around 1,200 kilos, sometimes a little bit less, with the lightest of cars in the class being around 1,170 kilos. This one weighs 1,261, which definitely isn't ridiculously heavy. That is still, as an example, far lighter than most of the GT3 cars on Gran Turismo 6, but it is heavier than many of the other vehicles in this class. That's the same weight, in fact, as the BMW M6 GT3, and that is a big car. So the fact that this Corvette does weigh a little bit more, it is on the higher end of the spectrum, isn't necessarily going to kill its potential, but it is something which could potentially hurt its pace a little bit, at least before, of course, balance of performance comes into play. Now, the horsepower per tonne is still 458, so it's not lagging behind the other cars, and one of the reasons why is because it does have a very healthy amount of power. In fact, it has the same amount of power as the Jaguar F-Type Group 3 machine, which is itself one of the more powerful cars in the class. So what's it like to actually drive? Does this car deliver the kind of performance that Corvette fans, myself included, would want this next generation of the Icon to have? Because obviously it's not a real car, it's inspired by actual racing Corvettes. Of course there are Corvettes from different teams, you've got Chevy, Callaway, some others as well, but this is more inspired by them, but with Polyphony's own twist. So will they use that opportunity in a similar way to the F-Type and some others as well to have some creative license there and give the car maybe more ability, or just make it good enough to compete but nothing special? How does it fall? Well, my overall thoughts on this car are that it's pretty much automatically going to be a crowd favourite. It's a vehicle which many people are going to drive as soon as they can once they get their hands on Gran Turismo Sport after the release. That's not surprising, and it's not necessarily a bad idea to want to do that, because this is a good car. Now, of course, as I've mentioned before, and doubtless as I'll mention again, the Group 3 cars are by definition, as with any of the other group categories, designed to be closely competitive to each other. That's the whole point. But there is definite variation in there. Some cars are notably better than others. And although the Corvette is not a weak car by any means, I would not call it among the strongest of the class. It's not slow, don't be disappointed, but it's a little bit slipperier, a little bit more tail-happy than some of the other cars here, and I'm not just talking about mid-engine vehicles, which you might automatically think would have an advantage, but actually against some of the other front-engine cars as well, like the Jag, like the Nissan GT-R as well. It does have more of a tail-happy manner than those do. It's not undrivable, not by any means. It's a very nice car to drive, but it's definitely not what I would call an automatic victory car. Some cars do kind of give you that edge, like the Jaguar. Even the McLaren 650S has the potential in the right hands for that. This one isn't necessarily to that same level. But that's it overall for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.